Hi, my name is Claude McKay, and I am a poet, writer, and author. So uh, I grew up in Kingsley, Jamaica, and I went to school in Kingsley, and I faced a lot of discrimination for the color of my skin and what I do and what I was writing. And I've always grown up to be proud of my African culture, and I couldn't stand that I was being discriminated against for the color of my skin. So I went and I wrote my first publication called The Songs of Jamaica. And in this, I very much just talk about of all the things and discrimination that was going on in Jamaica and how I felt about it all. And I won a lot of awards for it, and it was highly successful. And this allowed me to get the money to be able to go to America. And once I came to America, I went and I studied at the Tuskegee Institute for about 2 months or so. And then I didn't really like it there, so I decided I would leave. And I went to Kansas College instead. I went to Kansas College. And I was there for about 2 years, but I didn't really like it there, so I went and I left. And then I went to Harlem, New York, where I decided I would stay there. And I settled in Harlem. But I was still being discriminated against for the color of my skin and what I represented in the world. So this led me to write 2 of my publications, Home to Harlem and Harlem Chateaus. And I talk about the variety of topics from discrimination to sex workers. And people didn't like that I was talking about some of the unsavory aspects of the Black community. And one of those was Du Bois, and he did not like that. But I was just speaking the truth. I was speaking from my heart, and I was just doing what I needed to do and to spread about discrimination in our community. So I eventually left America, and I went and I traveled. I went to Belgium, and I went to the Soviets, and then I went to London. And when I was in London, I got really sick. I had some respiratory issues, and I almost died. I was hospitalized, and I almost died. And this led me to write one of my most famous poems, arguably. It was highly successful. It's called If We Must Die. And in this I say, well, if we must die, let it not be in vain. If we must die, let us have a noble death. And it's like I'm inspiring people to fight and be brave and fight against discrimination and everything that's wrong with the world at this time. And this was a very popular book, and a lot of people really enjoyed reading it. And it's become a staple of the Harlem Renaissance that was happening throughout this time.
Hi, I'm Calvin Coolidge, and I'm the 30th president. And some of the big things that I have done is lower national debt, lower federal budget. I also created the Immigration Act and the Renewal Act of 1926 and 1928.
I'm Hetty Lamar, and she was an actor and inventor that invented frequency hopping, which was used in World War II and also during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and has translated into what we know today as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth.
Hello, my name is Elliot Ness. I was born to 2 immigrant parents that were Norwegian. I grew up with them. They had a bakery. They died by the time that I was 14. I went to school. I was a good student in school. I got a degree in law from the University of Chicago. After that, I went and worked for my brother-in-law at the Federal Bureau of Prohibition, and there I grew in popularity and I grew in recognition, building my career. I became one of the Untouchables, a member of the group. The Untouchables were known as the Untouchables because nobody could bribe them. They were such good and outstanding cops from all over the country that nobody could bribe them, and they were so good. They worked to take down Al Capone through tax evasion. Although I did not work on this, I'm credited with it a lot of times because of just how I was associated to shutting down a lot of his distilleries and bootlegging operations. After that, I moved to the city of Cleveland. I helped the police department come up and get rid of corruption within that. I helped with police training. This altogether helped drive crime down by 20%, juvenile crime down by 80%, and vehicle accidents and deaths by 50%. With this, I also created lots of Boy Scout clubs that helped juveniles that were having a hard time to rehabilitate them and to help them on their way.
Delighted to make your acquaintance. My name is Bessie Elizabeth Smith, but people just call me Bessie. Um, at the peak of my career, people call me the Empress of the Blues. And who could blame them? I was the cat's meow. Gee, but it's hard to love someone when that someone don't love you. I'm disgusted, heartbroken too. I got the downhearted blues.
Okay, my name is Josephine Baker, and the reason why I'm so significant is because I was a spy for the French during World War II, and I was an entertainer for Nazis, and I got the information that they used, and I wrote it down in invisible ink on music sheets and gave it back to the French government. I was also the sub-lieutenant in the Air Force for the Women's Auxiliary, and I was a civil rights activist, and in 1963 I was one of 2 women to speak at the March on Washington.
Здравствуйте, I am Vladimir Lenin. I am a Russian revolutionist, and I have a pretty interesting history. Growing up, my family was kind of rocky, but it wasn't too bad. I mean, my family did get kind of persecuted by the government, and both my dad and my big brother did die, but we don't have to talk about it, it's not that big of a deal. So after that, that was kind of my kickstart to being in the Russian Revolutionary. But before that, I was a part of the law, and with that, I was sent out of Russia into Europe to talk to other Russians and kind of bring them back to Russia in a way. But then I realized during the World War I that I instead stood with the people instead of the government, and I decided to form unions over in Europe, all over Europe, especially in London, and I brought them back to Russia to fight the government and to revolutionize. And yeah. So with that, we started forming even more unions, much like the Southern Democratic one, and I formed units with like the Southern Union and Russia and all that. And with this, I became the face basically of the new communism, which was called Leninism, which was me, obviously, because I am Lenin. And with that, I just kind of boomed all over Russia, and also not only in Russia, also in Europe and America, because we had the Red Scare, which ultimately started in Russia and then just spread everywhere, because then we had more rise in communism and just for the fight of equality and civil rights. That's basically my story.
My name is Marcus Garvey, and I am a civil rights activist from Jamaica. I was born in San Ana Bay, Jamaica, and for the first 14 years of my life, I stayed there. I decided to move to Kingston to better my education, and I started to go into their school, but I experienced full racial discrimination from the teachers, students, and faculty. They called me names and disrespected me the entire time. So once I got old enough, I decided to move to London and go to the university in London for 2 years, studying in law and psychology. And once there, I learned that to be proud of my race, I need to teach other people their history and culture. So I was invited to go to Harlem, New York by my good friend Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington took me around Harlem and introduced different people, other civil rights activists, and taught me how to speak well. So once I was there, I gave multiple speeches and gained a bunch of supporters from the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And this association focused on teaching African Americans their history and culture and where they came from and how they are now. So I got enough supporters to start spreading my word all around the country, and I had over 6 million by the time of 1920. And in 1920, I set up the Black Star Line, which was a transportation system from Africa to the US and other countries. Since many people didn't know what these places I was talking about were, I decided to take them there and show them themselves. So I taught them their culture and history, and I also took them to those places. They got a tour of the nation and learned about the different cultures that they missed and did not experience in the US and were optioned to stay there. Sometimes they didn't want to stay, and sometimes they could have if they wanted to, but it was okay. And a lot of people didn't actually like this. Like, for example, W.E.B. Du Bois, who has something against Booker T. Washington. So instead, he called me a black nationalist, saying I want to keep African Americans inside of Africa instead of taking them back to the U.S. But I didn't let that bother me. I still stuck with my plan. But sooner or later, the FBI came after me and arrested me for 10 years after $25 worth of mail fraud. I don't even know what mail fraud is, but they put me in jail and kept me there. My message was still being spread, though, which is the amazing thing about it. And I actually coined the phrase, "Black is beautiful," letting African Americans and other Africans know that they should be proud of who they are and proud of who they are becoming in this world instead of ashamed because of all the racial things that have been told to them throughout their life. And now yeah. And now I was in the U.S. from this point, and I still spread my message after I got out of jail, and became known as one of the most influential Jamaican leaders for the civil rights activists.
Howdy, I'm Will Rogers.
And I'm Herbert Hoover.
I was born in Cherokee County, and I went on to Broadway and vaudeville where I performed my roping abilities, and then I went into the radio where I talked about politics. And I think this guy knows something about politics.
I was the 31st president and the #1 best president. Don't you agree? We did a speech together.
Well, yeah, but I think you're a nice gentleman. I just think Roosevelt's also kind of a better gentleman.
He stole my presidency.
Anyway, I did radio shows and newspaper articles talking about helping the poor and ending segregation in America. What do you do?
I helped fund the unemployed. I helped bring money into the economy. That's why I think I'm the #1 best president.
Yeah, and
#1 best president.
he was also president.
FDR didn't do that.
He was also president during the Great Depression, I want to point out, and so it's kind of a iffy argument, but yeah.
Well, it's not my fault that it was the Great Depression, you know? It's not my fault that everyone hated me for something I didn't do.
So we both tried to help the poor. One of us might have done it a little bit better than the other, but it was a pleasure to meet you. Yeah!
My name is Margaret Sanger, and I am a birth control activist, a nurse, and a women's suffragist movement person. So basically, when my mom died of tuberculosis when I was 14, because she had 11 children and 7 miscarriages, I decided that I wanted to find a more effective form of birth control to be able to be used by all women in America. So after I decided that I wanted to do this, in 1916, I opened a birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. But shortly after it was open, I think it was 3 days, it actually got closed down by the police due to it violating the Comstock Act. The Comstock Act was an act that did not allow women to use birth control at all. It only allowed married women to use birth control instead of single women. And since I opened the birth control clinic and allowed all women to use birth control, sadly the clinic got shut down. So after the clinic got shut down, I actually wanted to make birth control more used and available and cheaper. So I formed an alliance with Catherine McCormick and Gregory Pincus, who helped fund and research to find a new form of birth control, which is the oral contraceptive. So when this oral contraceptive was formed, it was more affordable and it was easier to use than other forms of birth control at the time. So after I found this new form of birth control, I created the American Birth Control League, and this later would become Planned Parenthood, which would help many women and men to have sex education and be able to have more affordable health care for reproduction reasons and many other things.
I'm Walt Disney. I was born in 1901 in Chicago, Illinois, and was raised in Marceline, Missouri. And one of the main things my family looks back on is me drawing and painting pictures and selling them to my neighbors and friends, which really initiated my love for animation. In high school, I studied drawing and photography classes, as well as studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. And my first summer job, once I moved to Kansas City, was selling things like snacks and newspapers to travelers at the train station. And this initiated my love for tourism and railroads. So one of the first companies I took part in forming once I moved to California was Laugh-O-Gram Films with my friend Iworks. One of the main products we produced was the Alice in the Cartoonland television series, which was one of the first series to include both animated and live-action sequences. Just a few years later, I formed the Walt Disney Animation Studios with my brother Roy Disney, and among other accomplishments, we were the first to have a synchronized sound system for the short film Silly Symphony. We were the first to have a tricolor Technicolor short film in the short film Flowers and Trees, and we were the first to have a full-length feature film using cell animation for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So despite some hardships such as employee strikes and bankruptcy, I'm the most influential man in the animation history. I initiated the golden age of animation, and I'm the most decorated Academy Award winner with 22 Oscars and 59 nominations total.
Hello, my name is Albert Einstein, and I am a German physicist, mathematician, and a professor. When I was born in Munich, Germany in 1879, and from there, me and my family moved around a lot until I ended up in Switzerland, where I went to a college to try to get my degree in teaching in physics and math. When that happened, though, is that after I went through that school, my thesis statement was rejected a few times, and I was not allowed to actually become a teacher or a professor. So instead, I moved back to Germany in order to go work at a post office, and for years I just worked at that post office. But in 1905, I created 4 theories, 2 of them being the theory of general relativity and theory of electronic. And basically the theory of general relativity is basically the idea that everything besides the constant speed of light is relative to the time and motion. And also after those years I became extremely popular, and when I became extremely popular in 1919, I used my popularity to try to create a different party in the German area called the Democratic Party, where we tried turning it into a democratic state. It eventually didn't work, and I had to move away in 1933 because of political differences.
Burns, I was a supporter of women's suffrage. I wanted to get the federal constitution of the 19th Amendment passed for women's rights to vote. I protested a lot. That was mainly what I did. I got arrested 6 times and went to prison for many months, where they tortured us and beaten us. But when I was there, I still protested, refusing to stop doing that because it was important to me. I led a hunger strike there, which didn't end very well. But overall, when I even got out of prison, I was able to protest and still continue that because it was important. The most time I was more productive was when we entered the war, because even though that was happening, I still wanted to bring importance to women's suffrage and supporting it to get the 19th Amendment passed. And my main thing was to get President Wilson to pass the amendment and support it, so it would cause more conflicts and everything to women's suffrage.
We're the Fitzgeralds, and we're the it couple of Hollywood.